The sacred is revealed in the ordinary. There is a beauty in this. But how do we discover the mystery of the sacred in our seemingly mundane existence? Welcome to Reavealed, a podcast sponsored by Resurrection Catholic Parish in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Let's join our hosts, Katie McAllister and Tony Pickler, as they explore the lives of people, organizations, and resources that will help us delve into the sacredness of the ordinary.
Welcome to our 11th episode of Revealed, where we are going to be focusing on an organization. We have a special guest that's going to be talking to us about his organization. Tony, why don't you introduce him?
Well, thanks, Katie. Yeah, today we have Bob Hornacek, who's the Assistant Executive Director at Paul's Pantry. He's also a deacon at St. Matthew's Parish. And I've known Bob for quite a while now, as he was in the diaconate formation program when I was over at the Diocese of Green Bay. So really welcome, Bob.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, Bob, can you just kind of tell us, who are you? What's your background? Who is Bob Hornacek?
I would be remiss if I didn't start off with the most important things in my life. My wife, Jennifer, and I have been married since 1999. We have 4 wonderful young men that we're helping to raise right now. I used to say we have 4 teenage sons, but the oldest is in his 20s now. So family life is obviously something that takes a very large portion of my life. I've been ordained a deacon for just over 5 years here for the Diocese of Green Bay, serving at St. Matthew's Parish, which is also the parish I came into full communion in the Catholic Church almost 20 years ago, because I am a convert to the faith. My faith is obviously another very important piece of my life. Don't do anything without it. It feeds me. It sustains me. It keeps me grounded. Hasn't always been that way in my life, but this is a journey, as the name of the podcast shows. It's been revealed to me slowly over these past 48 years. So about 20 years ago, I started to listen a little more finely. And so I came into the church about 20 years ago. I also professionally, initially was a musician. I thought that was going to be the path for me, and realized that that's a really difficult life. And as much as I loved music, I thought I would do best by getting a day job. And so while I was in college, started exploring journalism and mass communications, and stumbled backwards into a television career that lasted for about 2 decades. Spent most of my career at Channel 11 doing investigative reporting. And then about 4 years ago, God led me to Paul's Pantry. And I've come to realize that God knows what he's doing. And while I've been at times fighting God's plan, the most impactful things that I've done in my life came when I started to listen. And the more I listen, the more I feel his presence. And so that's where I am now. And I always say that's where I am now because I've stopped trying to figure out what God's plan is down the road, because all we're guaranteed is today. And so I'm very, very aware of the importance of the moment, of the day, of sprouting where God has planted me. So thank you for having me.
Thank you.
So that transition from being an investigative news reporter at Fox 11 to going to Paul's Pantry, can you talk us through a little bit of that?
So I'd been in the media world for about 2 decades, but it was right around the time I was approaching ordination to the diaconate that I had the perfect plan. And I was going to be transitioning out of the media and into some type of ministry work full time. Whether it was in a parish, with the diocese, a nonprofit, somewhere. I had this all planned out. And I was pretty close. I had interviewed at a few different places that had possible openings. And just like a couple weeks before ordination, they all dried up. And I thought, I guess I'm going to, Channel 11 wanted to keep me. I needed a job. And so I thought, all right, God, this was not what I thought you were drawing up for me. And so I started to, I was signed another contract with Channel 11 and was ordained to the diaconate. And let me tell you, first of all, how wonderful it was to be an ordained deacon serving the church and serving in the media. Because what that allowed me to do was to bring the presence of Christ to places that he's not in a lot. Mm-hmm. So I was able to bring that presence at work, out in the field, in the community, and just in ways I did not expect. So it ended up being a very, very spiritually fruitful 2 years for me personally. And I hope it was for the people who I encountered, because it had nothing to do with the stories I did. It had everything to do with the people I met, the relationships I built upon, and the moments that were shared. So that was fantastic. That being said, I had promised myself, and I promised God years ago, wherever you want me to go, I'll go. If you lead me there, I'm going to do it. And so being in the media, you're always under contract for different things, for certain time periods. And so there's a small window. If you're going to get out, you have to be very attuned to the windows. So I was just checking some random postings, 6-8 months before my contract was up, and saw that Paul's Pantry was hiring an assistant director. So I read the posting. I thought, wow, that's interesting. Now I had volunteered there especially during diaconate formation. So I was very familiar with the operation. I knew the director very well. I had interviewed him several times. So I called him up and I said, hey, what's this all about? And he was brutally honest with me about the position, what it was, why it was. He had shared, and he shares very plainly that he had had some health issues. So the board was looking to make sure that they had somebody in place to learn the operation. God forbid if something happens, they're not left high and dry. So he proceeded to tell me all of this stuff, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I proceeded to get off the phone with him and said something to the effect of, well, good luck with that. There is no way I'm doing that job, because it wasn't what I envisioned. I thought, I'm going to go into communications. I'm going to go into ministry. I'm not going to do some food pantry job. And so that was it. I wasn't going to do it. And then for 2 weeks, it just sat like a rock in my gut, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. And so there's a day that came to pass where I was driving. Our 2 oldest sons at the time were at Notre Dame Academy. I think I took them to school twice all year. So this was not a regular thing. Where we live in De Pere, 99% of the time I would zip down Webster Avenue to the highway and take that to the school. For some reason, I didn't. That day I drove through the city of De Pere, kind of took some back roads as I'm taking them to school. And the kids had no idea, but the whole drive, I'm having it out with God, because I'm arguing with him about this stupid food pantry job. So I'm like, why on earth is this? Why can't I stop thinking about this? This is not what I'm going to do. There's no way. There's no way I can do this with a family. And halfway there, my prayer kind of started to change. Like, well, I did say I would do whatever you called me to do, but you got to do better than this, God. Like, this can't be it. And so there I was, approaching a stoplight on Ashland Avenue, right by Vanderpeeren, so right by the highway. And I was approaching the stop sign, and I thought, okay, fine. I can at least put in a resume. I'll put in a resume. But God, you got to help me out and let me know if this is really something you want me to do. And I stopped at that light. And at that exact moment, a large Paul's Pantry truck pulled out right in front of me. And I go,
slam me over the
dang
head.
it. So I thought, what do I do now? I'm like, well, I have to. So but I still wasn't convinced. And so I put that resume and started the process. And let's just say there were a series of very fortunate events after that happened.
One of the things that our Revealed podcast does is to shine a light on organizations in our community to allow people to understand the organizations a little bit more and maybe how they can get involved in the organizations. So in your role at Paul's Pantry, tell us a little bit more about what does Paul's Pantry do, who do they serve, and how do you serve the poor?
Thank you for that, because that's a very important question, because I found in my time there, and just my time in this community, just about everybody in this community is familiar with Paul's Pantry and the work they do. Yet when they come down for a tour, they're blown away because they had no idea how it happens, the scope of it, the size of it, and it just blows people away. In a nutshell, Paul's Pantry is a free grocery store for people in need that is centered on this crazy idea that all people, regardless of income, ethnicity, language, education, anything, all people have dignity, all people matter, and all people ought to be treated well. And so we are the largest food pantry in the state of Wisconsin. We say that not to pat ourselves on the back. but to say thank you to the community that's made us that. Because there is a tremendous need in this community, but the community has been so generous in its support of Paul's Pantry over the last 4 decades. And so we've become the largest food pantry in the state. Nobody serves more people, more food as often as we do. So right now, we're set up like a grocery store, so people can come in and they can choose the food that they want to eat and that they want to feed their family. And that's a big part of where the dignity is, because nobody wants to be told, here's your food, this is all you get. I hope you like canned peas. Well, maybe 1 out of 10 people like canned peas. If we give out 10 cans of...
I'm not one of those, by
Yeah.
the way.
And I am.
There you
So
go.
there you go.
We got 1 out of 3 here that like canned peas. So, but the point is, if we all went to the food pantry together and we all got canned peas, we're either going to all give them to Katie or we're going to throw them away.
Yeah.
Most likely we're going to throw them away.
Right.
And Paul's Pantry was built on this idea that we all have dignity. Let's honor people's dignity. Let's give them choice. Let's allow them to select their own food. And we also are a massive rescue operation for food. We are the last place food goes before it gets thrown away. Because the fact is there's a massive problem with food waste in our country and in our world. I believe that there is no problem there's no shortage of food. There's a problem getting food to people who need it before it goes bad. And Paul's Pantry pioneered this effort, certainly in our community, in our state, but probably in the country. It was one of the first to really do this on a scale we do, where we go out with all volunteer drivers 364 days of the year, every day but Christmas, to rescue products from the grocery store and from food manufacturers that they won't sell. Because they either can't sell it or they won't sell it because they have fresher products. Because you know what? When you and I go to the grocery store, we're really picky. Mm-hmm. And if we're going to buy bananas, we're going to buy the good-looking bananas. And as soon as they look a little bit like they're overripe, we're not going to spend 59 or 69 cents a pound for those. Well, what happens to the old bananas? Well, before Paul's Pantry would be around, they'd just throw them away. And so Leo Frigo and a group of people got together in the early 80s and started this idea of going to the stores. Initially, they were turned away, so they had to go in the dumpsters and just pull it right out of the dumpsters. And then, before you know it, some of the managers said, well, maybe we don't want this old guy in his station wagon pulling up to our dumpsters. Let's let him in the store and just give him the stuff. So they rescue stuff that would otherwise be thrown away. Mind you, perfectly good food. Nothing wrong with it other than it might be bakery that's a day old or an apple that has a little mark on it. But there's nothing wrong with the food. So one of the major things we do is rescue food from the marketplace. We look through it, make sure it's all good, assess its quality. If it's good, we put it out. If it's not, we have some farmers who pick it up and take it and feed it to livestock. We try to minimize anything going in the dumpsters. And we do have to throw some things away because that's just the nature of it. And we always feel horrible if there's product that we have to throw away. But that's when we look at it and we say, we're doing everything we can to use as much as we can. By the time it gets to us, if it's too late, well, then okay, it can go. But at least it's getting to us before it goes out to the garbage. And so that's a big part of what we do. And we allow people to shop like in a grocery store setting with regular grocery carts. There's limits on the amount of items they can take simply because we have to be good stewards. Sure. And we don't want to run everything out. But so the bulk of what we have comes from the rescue from stores. But we also get a lot of food from food drives. Churches, community groups, schools do food drives for us a lot. But then we also purchase a lot of food. And the idea behind that is, we don't control the menu when it comes to the donations and it comes to the rescued items. It's typically the same type of stuff, but we want to make sure that the poor of our community have access to the same healthy supply of staples that you and I do. And that's the idea really when it comes down to it, is we want the poor to be given the same opportunity to decide what to eat that you and I have when we go to the grocery store. When you go to the grocery store, you never wonder, are they going to have milk today? They always have milk. Mm-hmm. Well, so do we, because we purchase milk. Mm-hmm. We purchase milk. We purchase butter, eggs, even when they're really expensive. Orange juice. We purchase rice and beans and oatmeal and broccoli and bananas and hams and turkeys and soap and shampoo, all kinds of different products that are healthy staples. But then the beauty is we give people the freedom and the power and the dignity to decide whether they want those things.
How would somebody listening get involved with volunteering? What kind of volunteer opportunities are there? How would they begin volunteering?
The best advice I have is the advice I was given about 12 years ago or so when I started. Just show up. You just show up and they will find work for you to do. We strive to be a very volunteer-friendly organization. We only have a staff of about 12 people. And that staff of 12 people is overseeing the distribution of about 20,000 pounds of food a day. And so we could never do it all alone. And so we rely heavily on volunteers. We have average about 25 to 30 volunteers a day, 6 days a week. And there's a whole bunch of different jobs for people to try out. And it really just depends on their age, their ability, what they want to do. But it all starts with the goal from our perspective of being as flexible as possible, because we realize when people are volunteering, they're not just looking for one more thing to do. They don't want another job. They just want to come help. So our staff really works hard to organize things and to really supervise the work that's being done. Because when volunteers come in, they don't want to just stand around and watch other people work. They want to do something. They want to be engaged in a meaningful activity. So that's what we strive to do to get set up. But we're also very big on matching volunteers to their interests and their abilities. We have a volunteer. His name's Roger, and he came to us a few years ago. And he, to be honest with you, he had some challenges. He had some physical challenges. He had some social challenges. And he was kind of difficult at first because we weren't sure where to place him. And, we had a couple challenging situations that involved him. But we're very big on this idea of dignity. And that's not just the people receiving food, but it's also the volunteers. And it's the donors. It's everybody. And so we decided to come up with a plan for Roger. And we ended up assigning him to the pig room, we call it, because that's where we take all the old produce, all the old bakery, and then we have the farmers who come pick it up. But we need somebody in there to unwrap all the bakery. You got buns, you got to take the wrapper off, throw that in the garbage, so there's a process to it. And it's not fun. It really stinks. In August, it's pretty smelly in that room. It's not the most attractive place. But he took it and he ran with it. And he thrived. He was awesome. And when he would come out of, it started when he first showed up there, he could barely be there an hour without having issues physically. It got to the point where he was there for 4 or 5 hours a day, and he loved it. And he was like a character. He was so great. And when he came out, then he was socially better, more present. And it was just, he thrived, and he did a job that, quite frankly, some people would never want to do. Mm-hmm. It was a thankless type of work, but he did it. Mm-hmm. Now, he passed away a couple of weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And I will tell you, I tell his story because I want people to know that people like Roger matter. And he was one of those guys that society sometimes tries to push aside and say, well, what good is he going to do? He did a lot of good. He did a lot of good for this community, and nobody knows it because it was behind the scenes. It wasn't fanfare. There was no trumpets blasting when he did it. He just quietly went about his work. We have volunteer opportunities at all levels and everything in between. But it all starts by just showing up and being present to whatever work you're called to do.
I love that philosophy of just showing up. Yeah. Because that's most of life.
Right.
Just show up.
Right.
And good things are going to happen. Yeah. So last question is, the Revealed podcast is all about how we see the holy or the sacred revealed. And in this case, revealed in the work of Paul's Pantry. So how would you answer that? How do you see the sacred? How do you see the holy revealed at Paul's Pantry?
I see it literally every day. God is a God of love, mercy, of justice, and I honestly think I have the most privileged position in the entire community because I see God's generosity up close every day. And it comes in so many different forms. I see it in the contributions that come into the business office that help fund the organization. Because I don't think I said this yet, but we are a 100% community-supported nonprofit. We don't get a dime from the federal government, the state government, the local government. We don't get food or funding from Feeding America or big, massive corporate organizations like the big charity, things like that. This is all independent, local nonprofit. So to see the generous gifts pouring in from people in this community is amazing. I've never seen checks as large as I have since I've been working there. And to know that there are so many generous givers in our community is just, it's just beautiful to see that generosity. But then I see there's a person who gives us a check for $10 every month because that's what they can do. And that is just as beautiful. And then on the donation or the sending forth the food side, to see the people who rely on Paul's Pantry for their groceries every week consistently. I mean, there are some people, I think of the mom who came during COVID, who relocated to this area because of family, because she lost her husband and she didn't have a job and she didn't know what to do. So she came back to this area because she had family here. We only saw her a couple times. She got back on her feet and that was it. But there are other people who've been coming there for decades because Paul's Pantry is their grocery store. And poverty is a way of life. They're not going to get off poverty, no matter how hard they try. No matter what programs you try to create, they're going to still be in poverty. So we are their grocery store. But we're so much more than that. The relationships that we're able to build with the people who are coming through our doors are, again, it's really hard to feel bad, to get down on your own life when you see people who have it so much worse, but yet are so joyful. I mean, we have a man named Jesse who comes every Friday. He's in a wheelchair. He was, he's in probably, I don't even know how old he is. He's probably in his 50s, maybe 60s. But he was hit by a drunk driver when he was a teenager. And he's been in a wheelchair for decades. He's one of the most positive, joy-filled people I've ever met. Comes in every Friday, always got a smile on his face, giving people a hard time. It's just like a social event. And so I see that, God's presence is revealed in people like Jesse. And just a few months ago, there was a man who was a regular shopper, and he had been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And the disease progressed rather quickly. And when it came time to move to hospice, he knew he was not long for this world. And I still can't believe this, but the one thing he told his family before I go to hospice, he said, I want to go shop at Paul's Pantry one more time. And I'll just tell you, God willing, I don't get a terrible diagnosis like that. But I can guarantee you if I did, I would not ask my wife to take me to the store to shop. But this man did, and it's because Paul's Pantry is not a grocery store. Paul's Pantry is a place where he felt loved, where he was somebody, where people cared about him. And I'll tell you, there wasn't a dry eye in the place when he came through that last time. But it brings me so much comfort to know that he was able to come and say goodbye to the people who cared for him. And I don't know, I think he did know after he left the impact he had on everybody else too. Because that's the thing, and that's, a very wise person showed me this back in the very beginning of diaconate formation. And it was this idea of the question of service versus helping. And it was, there was two dots, two collections of dots. And there were, one dot that was high and low. So those 2 dots. And then 2 dots that were at the same level. And the assignment was which one is helping and which one is serving. And we all argued about it and came up with the ideas. And then he came back and said, well, here's what it is. The helping model is the one high dot and the one low dot. Because the helper is on the top. And they're reaching down to help the person in need, which is a great thing. And it's a very important thing to do. And sometimes that's the way it goes. But sometimes, unintentionally, it can become a very powerful relationship where the person who has is over the person in need. The model of Christ, the model of Paul's Pantry, the model of the diaconate, I would say is that servant model, which are the 2 dots side by side. Nobody's above anybody. Everybody's at the same level. We're giving, we're taking, we're both giving as much as we're getting. And that, this encounter with this man who was basically on his deathbed coming through really speaks to me about the idea that, we who are working there, we who are volunteering at the pantry, we are getting so much from those we serve. I mean, it's almost unfair because we feel so much worth and value and dignity out of being with people in need. So there are some times when I think the folks who are shopping realize that how important they are.
There's like a mutual blessing in
right.
that. That's the term I've used in the past.
Yeah.
Is true service, as equals. There's a mutual blessing in that. It's not over one over another.
Right.
It's a mutual blessing.
Oh.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Well, Bob, thank you so much for coming in and sharing how you see God revealed, not only in your work as a deacon and your work at Paul's Pantry, but the overall work that Paul's Pantry does to bring God into this community. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Bob.
This has been Revealed, a podcast sponsored by Resurrection Catholic Parish in Green Bay, Wisconsin.